Let's talk as well this morning about this incredible story that 30,000 pupils have been branded as bigots. More than 10,000 primary schools in a single year have been labelled racist or homophobic. Pupils labelled in that way have minor squabbles. Toddlers been reported for using words like white trash or gaylord. Do we need to log and register all of these incidents? And if your kids either been responsible or been on the receiving end. 08453 00 9956 81333 is our text number. Start your message with WM or email adrian.goldberg@bbc.co.uk. Let's get a word with Josie Appleton from the Manifesto Club, who wants to talk about this issue of so-called bigoted kids. Good morning to you, Josie.
Good morning.
Do you think that we should log and register hate words when they're used in the playground?
No, I don't, and I think that's very much what we're arguing in our report that you just quoted. I think that there are serious incidents of bullying which need to be dealt with firmly by the school through exclusions or whatever, but the vast majority of these incidents being logged is really petty stuff. The vast majority, for example, are primary schools, and using words that the kids either can't understand, or the most appropriate response to it would be for the teacher just to explain it to them, rather than to fill in this form, say it's the local education authority, perhaps go on to the police. We know that the most everyday incidents have become blown up into this huge issue, like a kid saying, "Oh, your shoes are so gay," or something like that. We need a sense of proportion here. We know that is not homophobia, a 7-year-old saying your shoes are gay. This is just a kid using a word, and I think that we need to have a bit more proportion and deal with it in a more common sense way, really.
What are the obligations on local authorities and on schools to report this kind of language?
Different local authorities have different policies, but it's generally accepted that there's an obligation under various bits of government legislation for schools to be monitoring and reporting, and, for example, spotting tendencies, as they call it, towards homophobia or racism, to nip it in the bud. And this is very much going right back to nursery school. Nursery schools have anti-racist policies and racist reporting policies, and these are kids who can barely talk. And so I think that there is very much a consensus across policy that the responsible educational institution is monitoring kids in this way. There's no law that says they have to, and that's why there's a huge variety in local authorities in terms of their policies. So Birmingham, as you said, is very keen and encourages schools to report a lot, and other areas are much more relaxed about it. But there is a general understanding across policy that this is a responsible thing for schools to be doing.
Which words, then, would you permit pupils to use which are currently reported but which you think should not be logged?
I think there has to be a bit of common sense, doesn't there? So, an instance of bullying is not just about the words that's used, it's about what the kid meant by it, it's about whether it was said with violence or not. And I think that teachers are the best placed to make that decision about whether it's a serious incident or not. I think in general, children should be taught that racism and homophobia are wrong, but also just actually that a lot of childish nastiness, which takes all sorts of forms, most of which is to do with people's bags and shoes and etc. Teachers should try and teach children to be more even-handed, treat other people nicely, to share, and that kind of thing. And that is a part of setting a moral example. So I think that it wouldn't be a question of banning particular words or whatever. I think teachers have to look at it in a context to decide how serious it is, whether it's a matter of telling the kid off, whether it's a matter of calling their parents, or excluding them in extreme circumstances. So I think for the government to set up a list of banned words would be the wrong thing to do, and just really take it out of the hands of the teachers.
I'm just thinking, if you were a little kid and it was aware that you were in some way different, and then somebody in your playground, or a group of kids, because, that's often how kids are, suddenly starts calling you a puff or a gaylord, then that's actually quite damaging to you. And I would argue that the children involved should be held to account for that.
except that the Gaylord was a 7 or 8 year old, and it's obviously just something that they'd heard. They didn't really know what it meant. And when kids are asked, like, what do you mean by that? They just say, I mean rubbish or something like that. They don't. It's not that they have a belief about homosexuality being inferior or whatever. So I think that they have to look at the way in which words are used, and I think it is appropriate in a teacher in that sense to say, do you know what that word means? In the same way that when you hear a 2 or 3 year old swear, which happens as well, do you know what that word means? You shouldn't use it for this reason, and that's completely appropriate. But to fill in a form and report to local education authority is just way too heavy-handed.
What if somebody calls you white trash? I mean, that's arguably a racist use of language. Should that not at least be checked and monitored? Because beneath that, there might be something being fed to the child that is troubling.
White trash has been reported, and so quite often you have an exchange where both children are reported. One of the ones in our report is one kid called the other broccoli head and the other kid called the other chocolate bar or something like that. And so in that instance, both reported for racist incidents, and they were about 8. So, I think that obviously when kids get to 16, 17, 18, that's a different matter, because essentially they have beliefs about the world, they know what sexuality is, they know what race is, and they're making judgments. And so I think that's a kind of a different issue, and that's when they can start to show, when they can start to be racist. But I think before that, it's much more, children in general don't have systematic beliefs in that way, and for them every difference exists on a par with your shoes or your bag.
So would you, under the age of 11 then, for example, or under the age, of 16, simply leave the school to deal with it, no registering of this kind of incident?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that actually that we have a good news story coming from schools, which is that most schools, particularly in cities, are actually much more multicultural and even-handed than society at large.
And if somebody uses the N-word or the P-word in school, should that not be registered or marked?
It shouldn't be registered. No, I think it should be explained. And depending on whether the child was using it maliciously or whether they were using it, if they're 6, then obviously it means something different. Basically, there's something they've heard or whatever, and they're just turning it out. That's what the kids do. I have one teacher told me, she said, when I hear kids use the word Paki, I get my map out and show them where Pakistan is and say, look, this is another country, and this is the history of it. But to actually just to explain to children, basically to say, this is not an insult. This is just the background of the word you're using, and so that's why you shouldn't use it, and why you should respect other children. So I think that teachers will deal with it in a different way, but I think that a chance to behave positively and to actually educate children about history of other cultures. So, for example, asylum seekers, areas with a lot of asylum seekers, the chance to actually talk about the history of children and where they came from and what their experiences were, and to deal with it positively is much more productive than logging them and reporting them and getting the police involved. The police have been involved in arguments between kids in the playground where the kids were actually friends and they were still going around to each other's houses, and yet it ended up in a court of law. And that was a 10-year-old kid. And so I think that's just completely out of proportion. That's not what needs to be done in that situation. Basically, it's like a job for one of the parents or teachers to say, come on, that wasn't a good word to use, and then move on, because they're still friends. They're going to each other's houses.
All right, so Josie. Go on, thank you. I appreciate your time. That's Josie Appleton from the Manifesto Club saying that the logging and the registering of hate words in the playground has gone too far. At what age does hatred begin? At what age do children start using words, not just in an accidental way because they've picked them up, but in ways that signify that they really have got something in for their playmate about their sexuality or about their colour or their race? I don't know, I'm not sure I'm quite as relaxed about it as Josie, because if people used phrases like white trash or the N-word or the P-word in my kids' school, then I think I'd be worried about it. Even with my 6-year-old, I think I'd be worried about it, wouldn't you? 08453 00 9956. If your kid's been on the receiving end either of that kind of language or has been on the receiving end of being logged and registered in this way, I'd love to hear from you today.